Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
Welcome to a very special episode we are recording today. We have Dr. Schwartz with us. He's a fellow at Jerusalem-based Misgav Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy, and the author of The War Return: How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. So thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start with the initial conversation that a lot of our viewers who are joining in from India might not understand what Hamas is, and especially with the Western bias that has been created over the period of time, where we have repeatedly seen the word fighters, sometimes militants been used. But what we have seen in the last couple of days, at least, is just pure act of barbaric terrorism. So could you just, for our viewers, talk about what is Hamas, their ideology, and where do they get this huge-scale ammunition from?
So Hamas, as you said, I think they showed their true face in the last couple of days when we indeed saw barbaric atrocities on a scale that I think we haven't seen, certainly in one day, perhaps since World War II. Unfortunately, it surpassed the worst terror attacks that we've seen in India. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, and even ISIS attacks in Europe that we have seen in the last couple of years. So this is indeed, I think, the worst terrorist attack ever to have taken place, together perhaps with the 9/11 Twin Towers attack. But to your question, Hamas was created more than 30 years ago, a Palestinian organization, but with a very religious Islamic ideology. And they're part of a bigger trend inside the Muslim world that we call the Muslim Brotherhood. This is a group that started in Egypt about 100 years ago, and you can find them today in Turkey, in Qatar, in many areas of the world. And the purpose of this group, which Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood, is to recreate the Muslim Caliphate. So if you go back more than 1,000 years, there was a time when the Muslim Empire conquered the entire Middle East, and of course much more than the Middle East, and ruled through the rule of Islam. And this is the purpose of the Muslim Brotherhood. So everything associated with the West, everything associated with modernity, with technology, should be kicked out. And the Muslim world should go back to where it was. This is an anti-American, anti-European, anti-any civilization that you can think of. And Hamas is part of that ideology. Now, as to your second question of how do they get so much ammunition and where do they get their funding? So Iran is a huge power behind Hamas. It's interesting, by the way, Iran is a Shiite country, and Hamas belongs to they're Sunni Muslims. So it's interesting. But because they have a common enemy, in our case, Israel, and this is part of Iran's bigger strategy to take over the entire Middle East. So if you follow the foreign relations and the national relations of Iran, you can see how they tried and to some extent succeeded in controlling Iraq, in controlling Syria, in controlling, or at least having some kind of impact over Lebanon. And they have proxies in Yemen, and they attack Saudi Arabia, they attack the Arab Emirates. So they're trying to have their sphere of influence all around the Middle East. So in that sense, Hamas is one of their proxies. They're sending them money, munition, funding, training, whatever you want. Another force behind Hamas is Qatar, who also is involved very much with the politics of the Muslim Brotherhood. And this is a bit different because Qatar are not Shiite. But in any case, Iran and Qatar are the biggest funders and the biggest supporters of Hamas. By the way, Iran's supreme leader, since Saturday, even barbaric acts, and I think I want to repeat, but the beheading of small babies, seriously, and I can't even think of an adequate word. But still, you saw the leader of a country blessing those Hamas terrorists, saying that they did well, etc., etc. So they don't even hide their support for Hamas, and they stand behind them. They congratulate them, and they see them as part of their, ring of proxies, which supposedly attempt to control the entire Middle East.
And this brings me to the attack that we have seen on October 7th, actually. I mean, the nature and extent of the surprise attack launched by Hamas took a lot of people by surprise. I just want to backtrace a little bit and look at between 2021 to 2023. There has been 2 years of rather silence or not much action from the Hamas end. So was this attack planned very sophisticatedly, knowing how the locations were actually, especially with, let's say, the rave party that happened, the locations going from door to door and understanding the time that the military will take to come and rescue the citizens? Was Israel's, I would not say an intelligence failure, but calculations that how Hamas might react or how Hamas is, did that perception change in the last 2 years because they haven't attacked?
Yeah, you're asking very good questions. First of all, obviously, this has been planned for a long, long period. By now, we know that at least 1,000 and perhaps more than 1,000 terrorists infiltrated Israel. We know that this was a coordinated attack in the sense that they tried and succeeded in somehow shutting down many sensors and many outposts that the Israeli army had next to the border. Apparently, there were thousands of people involved in planning of this attack. By the way, the Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that Iran approved or gave the green light to this attack last week in a meeting in Beirut. So obviously, this was something that was very well planned for at least a year, with thousands and thousands of Hamas terrorists involved. Now, this, of course, leads us to a very big failure on the side of the Israeli intelligence. This is something that should not have happened. We're just 3 days after the attacks, and we're still, burying the dead, and there's a real chaos here in Israel. So we don't really know yet what was the reason behind it, but this is clearly an intelligence failure. This is not a lone wolf. Sometimes you have a lone wolf attack. This is very difficult to, what's going on in the head of one person. But when thousands of people for more than 1 year plan such a thing, and you heard nothing, I mean, the intelligence agencies simply did not know anything about that. This is clearly a failure. Now, from what we understand, the response of the soldiers on the border was relatively good. So in the first hours or days, we thought that there was a failure also there, but apparently it wasn't a problem of the soldiers themselves. They were simply overwhelmed by the numbers of the infiltrators. So if you have, a group of 10 Israeli soldiers, but 100 Palestinians come against them, their chances are very low. But if you take into account the fact that we have now more than 1,000 Palestinian infiltrators dead, and we don't know yet the numbers of the soldiers, but much less. So it seems that there wasn't a problem of actual fighting, but much more the early hours. So they caught us by surprise. And when the Israeli soldiers started to, fight back, they relatively fought well. So that there wasn't a problem of fighting. There was more a problem of the surprise, and of course, a huge intelligence failure. And we'll have to know the details later. And you asked me one more thing. Yes, I think that, on the one hand, Hamas is clearly a terrorist organization, but since for almost 20 years, they control the Gaza Strip. So there was some kind of a, wishful thinking or an understanding that they will have also some kind of other calculations. So, for example, they have to take care of their citizens. They have to be in some kind of good relationships with the United States, with India, with the EU, with the international community. So they will not do such a brazen and disgusting and, something that no human being can remain, objective or neutral. And here we are, and all of a sudden they showed their true colors. And yes, they are a terrible and a barbaric terror organization. We hoped that perhaps the fact that they also have to manage a country, in Gaza you have more than 2 million people, so it's like running a big city or something like that, and you have to take responsibility of your citizens. So there was some kind of an expectation, and this is an answer to your question. Was Israel taken by surprise because nothing happened, or we thought that we can achieve some kind of quiet with these people? So yes, there was some kind of hope that because they have responsibility not only to act as a guerrilla terror organization, but also responsible for more than 2 million people, that they will act more responsibly. But now we have seen that, unfortunately, they have one agenda. This is to murder Israelis, innocent civilians, unarmed Israelis in their beds, taking elderly women, Holocaust survivors. This is really beyond, I think, what human words can express. This is disgusting in the worst sense of the word. I can't even find the right words.
And if I could ask a little bit about the timing actually, because a lot of people might wonder the timing of such an attack. Of course, the Hamas leader, Mohammed Deif, had not given a lot of context. His just context was this time the atrocities that are happening in the Alaska. We want to actually storm there and take over. But nothing much has happened in Alaska for the last few days. Why was this time chosen actually for this attack? One. And the second, what I wanted to ask you is, if I look a little back as well, with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, for example, when they chose to attack last year, we have seen Hamas were very complicit in getting involved in that same operation when they could have actually, and there were rockets blaring in Gaza. So it just begs this question: why now?
So yes, I think that in the beginning there were a lot of speculations about the exact timing of the attack. It happened on Saturday, Shabbat. This is the day where Israelis, it's like Sunday. It's the day of people don't work, etc. And in addition to that, it's a Jewish holiday, so people were at home. It's a very happy holiday, the Jewish calendar. So that was one speculation, trying to, some kind of surprise Israel. It's reminiscent of the Yom Kippur War happening 50 years ago. That happened on the 6th of October. So one day later, 50 years ago, that also happened on a Jewish holiday or a holiest day. So that was one speculation. But I think that the more we understand and the more we learn, this was simply, it was planned for so long that they were simply ready. They were simply ready now, and they decided to attack. Now, I think that they succeeded much more than they expected. everybody was taken by surprise, as you just said, all over the world, in Israel. And I think they themselves were surprised that they had so much success. So I think they imagined that the IDF or Israeli soldiers will attack them much sooner, that it will be much harder to infiltrate the border. So the outcome that we see, we don't necessarily have to assume that this is exactly what they planned or how they. I mean, they were very happy with the outcome, but I don't think that they imagined that this will be the outcome. So my best, bet is that they planned it for a long time. There is no reason behind that, except for the reason that this is an organization whose number one priority is to infiltrate Israel, to kill Israelis, to take them hostages, and to cause as much harm as they can to the state of Israel. So, they planned this attack and they executed it when they felt that they were ready. I think that this is the best explanation.
Yeah. And if I could move to the Prime Minister's policy, actually, a lot of people have also speculated that Prime Minister Netanyahu is known for his emphasis for security and the promise of a normal life for Israelis without this constant fear of terrorism. And he has tried to do this with a strategy aimed at shrinking the conflict with Palestinians. And probably he wanted, a lot of people has mentioned and experts have mentioned that he wanted the Palestinian authorities' power to shrink, and that's why he let Hamas get the cooperation and get the power. Uh, how much of this recent events, particularly the Hamas attack, shift the focus back to the Palestinian issue, and the implication does it have for Netanyahu's own strategy?
So listen, we're talking, when we are amidst the battle. So now, of course, everybody's focused on that, and the entire world is looking, and the international community is shocked, and of course, Israelis are not doing anything but dealing with this. But I have a little bit of another explanation about the longer strategy of Netanyahu, and I think about 10 or 15 years ago, or perhaps even more, the understanding of Netanyahu was that it is impossible to reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians. Now, I'm not talking about Hamas, because Israel was negotiating most of the years, or actually all along, with the Palestinian Authority. In the beginning, with Yasser Arafat, of course, remember the Oslo Accords, and later Camp David, trying to reach an agreement. So later on with Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas. And I think that Netanyahu's view, which I support, I think this is a right analysis of the situation, is that it is impossible at this moment to reach an agreement with the Palestinians. The reason is that the Palestinians are not interested in establishing a state alongside Israel or next to Israel, but instead of Israel. So the Palestinian goal is to put an end, to undo the state of Israel. And at the current moment, there is no way that Israel, no concessions that Israel could make would be enough to satisfy the demands of the Palestinians. There were at least two major peace proposals by Israeli prime ministers in the last 25 years, by Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert. They were both, refused by Palestinian leaders. So the understanding in the Israeli society, and especially, by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that if I would put it in simple words, nothing good will come out of Israel's dealing with the Palestinians. And when I'm saying nothing good, I mean we can't reach peace with them, but we can't, we can't reach peace with them, but it's worthless even to fight them, because it's only bad news. We will be caught up in endless rounds of, fighting. And in the meantime, I think what Benjamin Netanyahu tried to do was to make better connections with the Arab world. And this was very successful. If you think about the Abraham Accords and the peace accords with UAE and Morocco and other countries, Bahrain, and now they were, talking about normalization with Saudi Arabia, which could have been a major, major event in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. I would even go as far as saying that it could almost finish the Arab-Israeli conflict. And there are much bigger and more important actors in the Middle East than the Palestinians. The Palestinians, while as we now see, can cause a lot of harm, but Saudi Arabia is a much more important country. The UAE is a much more important country, etc., etc. I'm not even saying about other Asian countries such as Indonesia or other Muslim countries which are very important, Morocco. So the strategy of Benjamin Netanyahu, I think, was to minimize or to deal with the Palestinians as less as possible. So I don't think that it is true to say that he tried to, make Hamas stronger. I think he knew very well that Hamas, is an evil organization, is a terrorist evil organization. But he thought that even fighting Hamas, unless we're really forced to, as we are today, is useless, is just a waste of energy, which is going to be caught up in endless rounds of bombings, and they will bomb us back, etc., etc. And I think that what Benjamin Netanyahu tried to do, and again successfully, was to focus his energies on the diplomatic side with the outer Arab world. So this is my explanation why we didn't see more aggressive Israeli policy towards Hamas. I must say that we now see that this has backfired, because in the meantime Hamas became stronger. They are quite sophisticated. I think they learned a lot of lessons in the last 10 or 20 years. They planned this for a long time, and unfortunately, they succeeded much more than we ever wanted and ever dreamed. So yes, it's a complex situation, and what is clear now, I think, is that this policy will not continue. It is almost impossible to think of any other scenario than Israel has to dismantle Hamas. Hamas, at the end of this round or battle or war, whatever word we would like to use, must not have the capability, the armed capability, to harm Israelis, to wound them, to kill them. This is simply impossible. I just want to give you, Israel is a very small country. The distance between the border and the next Israeli towns or villages is something like 2 or 3 kilometers. So you don't have a room here to make mistakes. One time we did this mistake, and we cannot allow ourselves to let another, animal grow there like Hamas and simply going on raping and killing and wounding people. So I think that this strategy will not continue.
And I want to ask you, you already mentioned my next question, but I want to ask you a little bit on that. Israel's strategy in dealing with Hamas has not been very clear in the past few years, and it's just been retaliation when attacked. Right now, as the Prime Minister mentioned, that there might the war will be long, and it will be in a way that the Hamas remember it for a very long time. So what do you see happening from here? Do you see a complete siege of Gaza with a ground offensive as well, not just the airstrikes? Or do you see a certain kind of political space being created within Gaza for other actors to come and take place, and Hamas being taken out of Gaza?
Well, listen, if there would be a possibility of another political, force going in Gaza and taking over, that could have been a good solution, but I don't see that happening. So I don't think that there will be any other possibility than to wage complete war on Gaza, including everything that the IDF will find necessary. Of course, ground invasion and, putting an end to each and every Hamas combatant. I think this should be the target. I think that Israel could not and should not afford finishing this campaign with some kind of compromise or something like that. No. We have been, we are past that moment. You cannot live in the house when a crocodile or a tiger is simply roaming outside your house. We have tried that, and that is not going to work anymore. So whatever it takes, and of course it's not going to be easy because Hamas is hiding inside the civilian population, but the fact that they're hiding in civilian population does not mean that we have to endanger our civilian population. So at the end of the day, each individual and each people has to take responsibility over their decisions, over their reactions, over their policies. And if this is what Hamas and the people of Gaza have chosen, there are consequences for that. This is their choice, and there will be consequences.
And if, let's say, the Hezbollah does get involved, we have seen somewhere very shaky grounds are not very clear of Hezbollah getting involved in this. But let's say if it get involved in the coming days, and Israel faces a multi-faceted war actually in this, where do you see this escalation of this conflict in the region, particularly concerning Israel's security?
Well, I think that this is certainly a possibility. This is certainly something that we have to take into consideration. And if we're going back to the beginning of our discussion, Hezbollah is also one of the proxies that Iran is using. And by the way, Hezbollah is even more connected to Iran. Hezbollah is a direct, proxy of Iran. So we see the footprints of Iran all over, and there's certainly a possibility of Israel having to fight on two fronts. Now, of course, every soldier and every strategist will tell you that it's always better to fight only one front. But if we're forced to do it on two fronts, we'll have to do it on two fronts. Israel in the Yom Kippur War fought in two fronts, in the Six-Day War even in three fronts. So if this is what we have to do, then this is what we have to do. It will, of course, be longer, the casualties be perhaps higher, but it is what it is. This is what we have to do, and this is what we'll do. If Hezbollah decides, if they will make the mistake and decide to enter the war or to try to shoot missiles into Israel from the north, then of course another front will be opened. That's not, it's not a good scenario for Israel. Israel would have preferred to fight only on one front, but if we'll have no other choice, then we'll have to fight it. We'll have to fight it.
I mean, it's again a possibility of the West Bank. Actually, it's still now it's under control. But if there's a possibility of another uprising in the West Bank as well, we have seen actually the Hamas calling out even Israeli Arabs to come and join the movement. Well, there has not been any as such possibility of them joining. Even the last year we have seen, for example, the Laws riots or something like that. Where do you see this going forward if there is a possibility of any such incidents happening?
So I must say that this was, of course, one of Israel's biggest fears, that at one moment, everything will erupt, as you said, from Gaza, from Lebanon, from the West Bank, from within Israel. We unfortunately have a lot of enemies around us. But I must tell you that this was some of the more positive things that we saw. And I think that in a sense, the atrocities that Hamas committed were so horrendous that I think that certainly for people inside Israel, which are, they're normal citizens of Israel, even in the West Bank, I think they find it difficult and they don't want to be associated with it. So right now, for an Israeli citizen, Israeli Arabs are represented in the parliament. They have connections in the West. They consider themselves to be, members of the international community. For them now to be associated with these acts of barbarity, I think that even for them, it's considered something that they're afraid to do. And while I can tell you that, for example, the missiles that are being sent from Gaza, they're not very accurate. So some of them sometimes fall inside the West Bank and, can kill their Arab brothers. And I saw today that some of the missiles fell around Hebron, around Arab cities in the West Bank. And instead of being angry, the Arab local population, Palestinian population, were jubilant that, such a huge event that the people of Gaza are sending rockets. So on the one hand, you see this, they feel connected to what's happening in Gaza. But on the other hand, I think they know they have a lot to lose. By the way, if you look at what the Air Force is starting to do in the Gaza Strip, I don't think that the people of Gaza are going to have very pleasant next few days. So, I think they consider their options. But for now, I must say that one of the main targets of Hamas was to incite this eruption all around. And for now, after 3 or 4 days, we don't see it. This is relatively a good sign. If we can talk about good signs in these horrific days, we can certainly say that the Arabs inside Israel, the Arabs in the West Bank, and of course Lebanon, each of these groups is of course different. But for now, we don't see it happening. Of course, if it will happen, then we will be dealing with a much more difficult situation.
We have seen the hostage crisis, and it's unanticipated. We haven't seen ever in the history of hundreds of hostages being taken into Gaza, and not just the hostages, their young children actually been taken. There are Holocaust survivors. Where do you see Israel negotiating on this, or is there a prisoner exchange like what we have seen in the past, or will Israel not negotiate and would like to risk the prisoner's life and go for a rather more offensive approach?
Yes, well, of course, this is a very sensitive issue. And this is, one of the worst nightmares that one can imagine, that if your family member is taken hostage, and of all people by Hamas. This is a nightmare. I've even heard today about a woman who has 5 family members hostages. So from her family, 5 people are hostages in the hands of Hamas. I think a few things we can say. One of them is that relatively a large number of those hostages, I think about a third, have dual citizenship of another country, usually European country, or American, Canadian, British, French. My assessment is that these people have, of course, greater chance to be released. Because still, I don't think that Hamas wants to deal with the United States, with the UK, France, So I hope that at least a large number or a substantial number of hostages would be freed immediately or in the very short term. Now, regarding the other people who might remain in the hands of Hamas, we have to take into account also the fact that Hamas is using them as a psychological tool. So we're not only dealing with normal taking hostages, but they will try to say, okay, if you don't do this and this, we will start shooting or killing hostage every hour or every day. So we're quite prepared for that. This is one scenario that the Israeli society Israeli population is being prepared to. And another question, of course, is the question of how do you wage war when you don't really know that perhaps somewhere that you're going to attack, you're going to harm your own citizens. So, of course, there are a lot of questions here how to do it. My impression is that these attempts, the diplomatic attempts to try to free them, and the military attempts to try to take over the Gaza Strip, will be happening simultaneously. So I don't think that Israel will wait, to somehow solve the issue of the hostages or to wait, because this will simply give too much power to the Hamas, and we have seen that Hamas, what they are usually doing with power. I don't think we have to continue with, giving them more leverage. So I think that both of these attempts and efforts will be taken, will be made or done simultaneously.
So last thing before I let you go is what I wanted to ask you, your final assessment actually on what Hamas did. It does have a political wing as well, but if I look at the more aspect of the military wing and what kind of terror activities that they have been reading on, and I think it's very clear after the attacks on 7th, didn't they know the ramifications of what their actions would be, and that Israel will retaliate, and the international community will join hands to help Israel in this battle? What was probably going on their mind while carrying out such an attack? I'm sure that they didn't believe that they can get away with carrying an attack of this scale, right?
It's a very good question, but I think in order to understand what's going on in their minds, you have to take into account the education and the indoctrination that generations of Palestinians, and we're talking here about already millions of Palestinians who are being taught from day one, from their childhood, that Israel, of course, is their enemy, and that Jews are not human beings, and that Israel is the devil. And when you grow up in such an atmosphere of hatred and such an atmosphere of complete, dehumanization and complete, you feel they feel the complete victims, because in 1948, Israel was established, and they think that, we robbed them of their lands, etc., etc. And when you grow up and your entire society supports that story and that message, you're simply filled with this hatred, and you don't think of anything else. This seems almost natural, that when you meet a Jew, you have to kill him, and the more brutally, the better. And you just met the devil, so you should be happy, to kill them. And you should have, I'm saying it with disgust and with utter shock, of course, but I'm just trying to tell you what I think goes on in their mind. So I think that the hatred to Jews and to Israel is simply, does not leave much room in their minds to any calculations, as you said, what will happen. And I think, by the way, that the destruction, or at least for now, the destruction of the Gaza Strip is not very important, because when you wage a religious jihadist war, then the destruction of some real estate, with all due respect, is not so important. You're fighting in the name of Allah, in the name of Islam. You are the descendant of a great civilization, Islam, of 1,400 years. And these infidels, Jews, Christians, Westerners, whatever, everybody who's not Muslim, they are filthy. They infiltrated the Middle East. They took our lands. We can do everything we want. So this I think what goes on in their mind. And when this is the state of mind of people, it's very difficult to discuss rational or what we call rational. They would say that this is rational. Going to heaven by killing so many Jews is the best way to fulfill your life.
Even at the cost of losing political power at Gaza?
So what you're asking is exactly, you just asked me a few questions ago, what was the Israeli strategy? So this was exactly the Israeli strategy. Israeli strategy said they want to lose control? Do they not act like a normal political actor? This is exactly what you're asking. You're asking, don't they understand that they have a lot to lose? So we thought they should have some restraints because they understand that there will be repercussions. But on Saturday, we have at least learned that the restraints they feel are not strong enough to stop them for doing these atrocities.
Well, that's all the question that I had, actually. Thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.